Henrik Sandal Finderud, he is educated from the Norwegian Academy of Music, actually, and with a degree in classical song and vocal pedagogics. So maybe we should ask you to sing, but maybe not today. From 2007 to 2017, he was performing full-time with various theaters and professional ensembles, including Nordic Voices, the National Opera in Oslo, and the Norwegian Soloists Choir. From 2013, after moving north to Bodø, going to the right place finally, he helped develop the regional professional and vocal ensemble Vocal Art. And you know, Vocal Art was here when the Queen was here. So Henrik has been part of that ensemble, but he was too busy with this project to come here and write that. But you have been in München before, right?
I've been there once in 2005 with Oslo Chamber Choir at that time.
Right, exactly. So good. Since late 2017, he has worked on Bodø 2024, first on the EU bid between 2017 and 2019. It takes 2 years to make a bid like that. And then with the official company delivering the title year. We are so happy to have you here, Henry. And this.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, shoot. The time is yours now. Thank you.
Okay. So first of all, thanks for having me. I wish I was there in the room. Maybe next time I can be there with you. But let's make the best of it. It feels kind of being next door right now. So with this nice presentation from Gunnar, I won't say much about myself, other than I need to just, every time I do this kind of presentation, and especially actually when I do it here locally and regionally, I have to stress the fact that I am not from this city, from this region. I'm from the Oslo region, 100 miles south of here, which you will understand from this next 40-minute presentation that this is an important point. Being one of the people that move the right way from south to north, sort of proving the statistics wrong, because one of our big challenges and a big motivation from the city side to do this European Capital Culture project is, in fact, that we're losing resources from the north to the south for various reasons. But I'll try to tell the more optimistic version about Bodø. So that being said, I am one of the people volunteering to move from the south to the north. We don't need a lot about me. I think we should go into presentation mode, and I'll try to follow the presentation from here, even though I don't see what you see. So if Terry can tell me when we are on screen with the presentation.
Okay, just a second here. It'll be just a second. Because I changed things, I have to go back in.
Yeah.
Okay. Oops. Yeah, like that.
And you are recording it, right?
I am recording. That's why it won't let me do things. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't realize. Let's see if I can go in here. Let me see if I can get in.
Here we are.
Yeah. I have to get. Just a second, I have to click into it, everybody. There it is. We're on here.
You're on there. So I see your screen now with the folder system, but if you are in presentation mode, I can.
Oh.
Are you, I mean, what do the room see now?
We see
the
main slide.
Oh yeah, okay, then we'll start.
Yeah.
I think maybe then you are recording the other screen. Maybe you want to double check that before we move on.
I'm recording.
Since I see your folder.
Oh, you do?
It's probably recording your folder. Just make sure when you share screen that you share the screen and not the program, if that's
Yeah,
an
I'm
option.
I have to go stop share.
Yeah, and go again, and then make sure that it's the main or the same screen sharing. So
Let's see if it's this. Does that change it?
that's perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so the main topic today is Bodø 2024, but I'll talk a little bit about Bodø in general as well. That's part of the idea. I hopefully just go next slide right away.
Oh, and no, it won't go next slide. There
you go. Thanks. So hopefully we'll cover these topics. So a little bit about Bodø, a little bit about the ECOC, the European Capital of Culture in general. I did already touch on very briefly why European Capital of Culture in Bodø. And then hopefully a little bit about what we are actually doing, even though that's the most complicated thing to answer quickly. Before we move into this, let's see if we can just watch a video clip from the days before our February 3rd opening. And I'll, yeah, if you move on to the next slide and then start the video, I'll take a 2-minute break.
Ja, dette var en skikkelig frisk bord. Men nå det på tide å starte kulturhovedstadsåret her i Bodø.
Yeah, we can move on to the next slide. Yeah. So this was the opening of the TV production. We prepared this video clip with the very loving help of Queen Sonja for both the opening of the formal part of our ceremony and also for the TV production on NRK. I don't think a lot of people knew she was this good at skiing, but this was the at least I think a little humorous opening of a very formal and important day. So moving into the background here, Bodø is the regional capital of Nordland. Bodø municipality and Nordland County share this project, Bodø 2024, 50-50 between them. So moving on to the next slide, Terry. So just a few very brief facts. Bodø is a city of 53,000 inhabitants. The region is around 243,000 people. Bodø is the regional capital of this this region that we stretch sort of from the middle of Norway across the Arctic Circle and up to where Troms and Finnmark, the northernmost region, begin. If you ask me to summarize the modern history of Bodø, I think fish and flying is the best way to put it. So fishery is the main historic export, still is an important export factor. Today, we do more fish farming than wild fish, or at least equal lengths. What's it called? Equal number of people working, but a lot more money in fish farming these days. And the city, as we'll get back to shortly, is developed as an aviation city. We'll get back to this, but it's an important part of the identity and understanding what Bodø is, to know that we have been a NATO Air Force base for 7 decades. Next slide, thanks. So this is where I'm sitting right now. So just now it's dark outside, but this is in fact where I live now. This is where we moved to 11 years ago, very soon to be 11 years ago, from central Oslo backyard to this view. Now there is an important story to me behind this picture, because when I moved from Oslo to Bodø, my impression was, like most Norwegians, that the winter in the north is dark. It's presented, or the image is that we are almost in a polar night, like the really far north. So I like to start my presentations with this picture, which is from where I live, from my garden, just outside of where I sit now. And the picture is shot at the darkest day of the year. So this is December 2018, just before we delivered our first round bid to the EU, which to me is still amazing when I look at it, because this is the middle of the day at a time of the year where people tend to think that we are in complete darkness. So my point is really, when we move on with this presentation, to keep in mind that sometimes I think we can sort of reimagine how we present ourselves, maybe create some more positive stories about who we are or where we are, and maybe not focus as much on the fact that the day, on the darkest day of the year, is just a few hours long, maybe 4 or 5 hours on a clear day. But let's focus on the fact that you get hours and hours of sunset and beautiful colors, and that it's more about light than about darkness, which is a central point to our program when we get to that later in the presentation. So next slide. We have to place ourselves in Europe. So when we go out of Norway and meet people, I like to start with this map, and I like to give people a few seconds to just orient. And I'm not sure how this is viewed when you're in the USA, in Minneapolis, but in Europe, I get a laughter at about this point, when people realize that this is Europe upside down. And then I like to say that it's not upside down, it's Europe from Bodø's perspective. It's how we view it from the far north, from the very periphery of Europe. And to be fair, what's right and what's wrong? Who says what end to view a globe from? It's the opposite way of what you normally see on a traditional map. I'll admit that. Now, the problem with a lot of the traditional maps, and this says a lot about how Bodø and Northern Norway present themselves. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see one of the typical historical maps of Europe. And I'll give you another few seconds to orient and see what's the problem with the traditional maps of Europe. So this is not my cropping. This is an actual map of Europe. And the problem is that it's cut off at in the middle of Norway. So you still have, what is it, maybe 10, 11 hours of driving from the end of the map until you are in Bodø. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but you see the point. You're missing the north of Scandinavia on a lot of the traditional maps. So in a way, the European Capital of Culture project is, even though it seems like how to say, it seems like a cliche, but it's really about placing ourselves on the map and reminding people that we are actually here, and Europe can have different perspectives depending on where you are and what your story and your background is. So we'll zoom in a little bit on the next slide. This is Nordland. This is the region I'm in right now. This is where we live. So you can see Bodø right in the middle of this map. And I just let Google Maps calculate the drive from the southern border down in Bindal and to the northernmost point of Nordland. So this is a little more than 800 kilometers, 12 hours, 15 minutes to drive if you catch the ferry and if the roads are open. So it's a long narrow stretch in the middle of Norway. Now my claim here is, this is me personally speaking, if we now move to the next slide, I'll show you the exact same driving distance in Central Europe. So if you take the exact same drive, you can get from Austria, Bad Ischl, which is actually this year our sister city. You can drive through most of Germany and then all of the Netherlands until you get to a former European Capital of Culture in Leeuwarden. They had the title in 2018. So this is also 12 hours, 15 minutes. So I believe that the map on the left of Nordland County have a stronger sense of community and common identity than what you get driving through Central Europe. Now, of course, distance is a challenge, but if you view it like this, I think we can also view it as an opportunity to say that this region actually has a common sense of belonging. And we'll get back to that term again a little bit later, but now we can move on to the next slide. So a different perspective on distance is this. So this is a winter picture of Bodø. Of course, we're quite far away from the sort of power central of Europe. The decisions are made in Brussels. The national decisions are made in Oslo. So we're 1.5 hour flight away from Oslo. But when you are here, as you can see, I think the better perspective, or the better story to tell, is that it's a really compact city. So right in the background of the city, you can see the airport, which is a huge part of our project that is the next chapter of this presentation. So you can walk from your gate to all the hotels in the city center. It's a 15-minute walk. And if you have a boat, as you can see, you can catch fish just outside of the city center, or you can even, like the Queen, go skiing from the mountain peaks just across the fjord. It's actually one of those peaks in the background that video was shot on in the days before the opening. So the point with this introduction to the presentation is that Bodø is in fact in northern Norway. It is in fact proper flight away from southern Norway. We have no direct international flights, but still, I think the perspective should be about light, community, common identity, and actually quite a compact little city that has a lot of opportunity. So moving on, next slide. This is a short chapter about European Capital of Culture as a concept. Next slide again, actually. So I'll just leave this one on. I won't read the whole thing, but I would like to share with you what or how the EU presents this program, European Capitals of Culture. They want to safeguard and promote the diversity of cultures in Europe and to highlight the common features they share, as well as to increase the citizens' sense of belonging to a common cultural area. So hopefully this already makes sense compared to the last chapter of the presentation, the feeling of common cultural areas. So I think we already have quite a strong sense of community in Nordland, but we have potential in connecting closer to the rest of Europe. Now, I think maybe a common misunderstanding from Europeans towards the USA is that it's that you compare the USA to one of the European nations. So it's one nation. It's the USA. But maybe you actually tend to have a more precise view of Europe if you see it the other way around. It's an area of several nations united in a way. Now, we went back, I think. Just next slide again.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So, yes. So the point is really that the European Capital of Culture is an attempt at not creating one nation, but creating some sort of togetherness in diversity or something like that, which is actually the EU motto from the very beginning of the project. We can move on to the next slide. So here you have the list. I won't go into detail with the program itself, but just while you're looking at this one, the first European Capital of Culture back in 1985 was initiated from then Minister of Culture, Melina Mercouri in Greece. And of course, to Greece, it makes a lot of sense that Athens is that's the birthplace of modern society, and that's where everything should start. Makes a lot of sense. Moving on to Florence, or Firenze, as we say in Norwegian, still makes a lot of sense. And you can see you go through these big European cultural cities. The problem is, of course, that Europe is not, it's not a very big part of the world. So you sort of run out of cultural cities. So around 1990, they made the first revision to this concept, and they said, well, this has to be more than just the main cities of Europe. It has to have some sort of purpose. So from 1990 and through these columns, you can see that you are you're viewing the development of a program that is turning more and more into a development program than a marketing program of the main European cities. So I think you should see this concept and this list of cities that are now part of this big network. Our common identity is being cities that have been through some sort of change, deciding to use culture and cultural development as one of the factors in how to establish a strategy, really. So each of these cities, small European cities, a lot of them, one former Norwegian city there at the bottom of the second column in Stavanger, 2008. The third Norwegian city on the first column next to the bottom there, next to Bologna, is Bergen. Other than that, lots of small cities that I guess most people haven't even heard of, but they have in common that they have had some sort of challenge and decided to use culture as part of their strategy. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide in this chapter. What are we, I mean, what does the concept European Capital of Culture contain? So most people tend to view this as a big festival, a one-year festival. So I just want to share with you very quickly here that the concept really has 6 categories. And the jury, the EU jury, is very particular about each category being equally important. So the city is building a long-term strategy. The city has to have a strategy on how to reach new groups of audience, to reach people that are still not engaged. They need to see a clear idea of how the city is trying to be more European. Of course, it has a cultural program, and it has to build capacity on a long-term basis, and you have to prove that you're able to manage it. Just, we don't need to go into details. We'll get back to some of these categories. So next slide. So now we are moving back to Bodø. Why did we take this initiative. So far we've seen a city that I view Bodø as a rather proud city. It's like we have this feeling of we sort of, I mean, we tend to view ourselves, I think, in Bodø as rather tough. We've decided to live here halfway to the North Pole, withstanding the winter storms and all of this. Of course, that's not a reason to apply for European Capital of Culture. You need to have a better reason than that. We've also talked about how these cities that have been through the program already have the development factor in common. So then why Bodø? And next slide, I actually have the answer to that. So the most interested of you in the room now will know this number from before. This is the number of people living in Nordland. So our big problem is that this was also the number of people living in Nordland in 1965. Now that's a demographic problem. Not growing in population is, I mean, at least in the way we organize our society right now, that is a problem. It's not a good sign that you do not grow in 50, 60, 70 years. So we need to do something about this. We need to do something to create activity, interest, to get our story and our perspectives out there. And that is really the question, the answer to the question why. We need to grow. And then we can get into details about what story we actually presented to the EU. Next slide. So this is a little bit before the time we were 243,000 people. This is probably at the time where Nordland, I guess, we were around 200,000 people. So this is Bodø in 1938. So right before World War II, the city has sort of grown into a, I don't know, medium-sized Norwegian fishing village. You can see the boats in the harbor. You can see actually some small-scale industry along the inner harbor. A full-size church in the sort of central right part of the picture. So this means at this point, Bodø is rather ambitious, starting to grow, starting to become a real city. Now, at this point, Bodø have already survived two big, important changes in its history. First, the first big change is when the boats got engines. So they had to relocate the city from places where you can pull your boat onto a beach and move it to here. So you can actually dock the boats, as you can see in this picture. Moving forwards a few decades, you had a big crisis and a big change in fishery when the herring first arrived, building this huge Klondike-like adventure for a decade, and then disappeared like fish can do. So the narrative that we wanted to present to the EU is that this city has already built some sort of culture for handling change. And then the biggest change came just a few years after the picture you can see. So next slide. The result of World War II, the beginning of World War II, was devastating to this city. Most of it was just completely eradicated. I think the city had something like 30 or 40 buildings left. People were warned, so there were very few casualties. I think maybe Gunnar knows this better than me, but I think the story is around 10 to 12 people that didn't make it out of the city on time or didn't want to leave. But most of the city moved out to cabins or neighboring villages, and it was completely eradicated. So in the rebuild, if we now take the next slide. In the rebuild through the second half of the 40s, or mostly through the 50s, the city got a lot of help from especially Sweden, and quickly built a small core city center again. And I think the first decision is just 5 years after the end of World War III, 1950 or maybe 49, 1950. NATO decided that Bodø was going to host the northernmost European Air Force base. This resulted in a big decision for the city's development. So this is an aerial shot of Bodø as of today. And as you can see, the city center in the top end of the picture is rather compact. It's a small city. And here you can see the reason why. Because half of the peninsula, or from this perspective, looks like more than half of the peninsula is actually an Air Force base. So I think people, I mean, we just chose to present this as a positive story. You have the airport close to the city, but of course, it's also been a big challenge to how the city, I mean, how do you develop a city with this big Air Force base part of the peninsula? So in 2012, it was decided that this Air Force base was being relocated. And a 10-year process started from 2012 to 2022 when they formally closed the Air Force base and decided to relocate the airstrip because it's now, I mean, it's basically not usable anymore, and trying to open up for a more long-term development of Bodø. So next slide, we get to the first keyword of our European capital of culture, which is the transition. So European capital of culture cannot build a new city, but we can engage people. We can engage people in meeting each other, creating communities, starting discussions about where do we go from here. So in a way, summing up, I think, what culture and arts can do. Who are we and who do we want to be, and how can we envision who we can be? So next slide. You get a visualization of what we have just started exactly 1 year ago. I think we're 1 week away from the 1-year anniversary of the actual build of this city relocation. So if you remember the last picture, the airstrip was in the middle of the city. Now this is the visualization of what we are aiming at with the big infrastructure city development project. Next slide, I think you get a better view. That's a mistake from me. So one more. Next slide. There we are. Yes. So this, again, just repeating that we are not building this city because this is a 50 to 100 year project. This is sort of Bodø's long-term goal, is to create this smart, environmentally friendly city where you can still, in a way, prepare for a future way of handling aviation. Maybe we have the first emission-free flights in and out of Bodø. Who knows? At least we have the opportunity now. But this is sort of the background for the project. Next slide. We're moving back into culture. This is the city center of Bodø as of now. In 2014, the library in the middle of the city and the concert hall just behind the library were opened. So we have the 10-year anniversary as part of our program. This, to me, is proof that the strategy of including culture in how to develop a city was already present just a couple of years after the decision to close down the Air Force Base or relocate the Air Force Base. The first proof of the city's long-term strategy actually showed up in the city center. And I think to locals, this is kind of already forgotten that the change, I mean, we are in the middle of the transition. I'll stick with the keywords here. We are in the middle of the transition. So next slide. Part of this transition is that we have, in fact, now the world's youngest, or at least newest, Philharmonic Orchestra, the Arctic Philharmonic. This is inside the Stormen Concert Hall. And next slide right away. This is one of our projects trying to sort of symbolize how urban culture and arts can be part of nature. 5 one more slide. We have the final slide of this chapter. So I think summing up, this is about looking for resources. I'll watch the time here so we can just move on. Next keyword. Art of nature. I know the term is nature of art, but in this context, it works with art of nature. So next slide. Nature is very much part of our identity. I think most people of Nordland are very proud of their surroundings. And you can find these examples, small and big examples of how art and nature kind of merges, and being outdoors and in and within nature is very important. Next slide. Just reminding you that this is what this part of Norway, or actually most of Norway, is built on. Cod, presented like this, to me, this is art. Next slide. So this is the final keyword. We are built. Again, I know how to spell chips, but we're not built from chips. We're built by fish and ships. So the final keyword, this is really our sort of cultural history keyword of the project. The idea is to try to view our history and background and our sort of cultural history, our common cultural history in this region with new perspectives, with sort of a fresh look on our history. So next slide, you can see one example of that, trying to merge history. So this is the choir from one of our projects, the Querini Opera, and they coincidentally were in the city rehearsing their opera last fall, while we had let's say more urban or younger take on the cultural history. Of course, a project that we've had let's say we've had some reactions to that project, but we've also reached out to new target groups, new audience. So we had to get this little snapshot on how history and let's say a more urban look on, or more urban aesthetic all of a sudden just merged. Next slide. Sami culture is a big important dimension of our program. So we are in the sort of southern, not the southernmost, but in the southern part of Sápmi, the Sami cultural area that stretch across northern Scandinavia and parts of Russia that is not available to us right now. It's a big challenge actually to Sami cultures that historically are nomadic across the northern region of Europe. But I'll just make a very, very short argument on how we include Sami culture in our program. So this is probably aesthetics that you would know. It's clearly Sami, it's clearly Northern Norwegian, and if you move on to the next slide, you'll see one of the sort of traditional pictures of how we view Sami culture. Reindeer herding. This is the sort of Disney Frozen picture of Sami culture, which is still a very important part of culture. But in this whole idea of viewing culture with new perspectives, opening up to new ideas, we have to remind ourselves that, next slide, Sami culture can also be modern expressions like this. This is from one of the productions we did very early on in our project with a Sami rapper or slam poet from the Swedish side, Timimi Merak, which is, I mean, the traditional aesthetics are not part of her way of expressing, but it's still 100% Sami. Next slide. This is a different example from a dance production, also with 3 Sami performers, where I think they, in a beautiful way, described how culture is not something that you can dress and undress. You can, of course, you can dress, you can have a bunad or you can have a kofte, you can wear something to sort of show your pride, but you cannot really undress culture. It's something you are weaved into. It's something you are. It's something that you are part of. And they literally danced this feeling of being weaved into culture, which I think turned out to be a beautiful production with a very serious undertone. Next slide, please. So we have a main target group, and now we are moving into the sort of trying to sum up this argument in this presentation, or this narrative that I'm trying to present. We talked about demographics and how our region is not growing in population. So the main target group has to be youth and young people. So next slide. These people, of course, we're working to reach, as I said, we have an outreach perspective. We want to reach everyone really, but our main focus is on the 13 to 19-year-olds. They, of course, can be spectators or audience, like here. But if you move on to the next slide, we're also working hard on creating the sort of next generation of cultural workers and even decision makers. So next slide, just a few facts about our youth project. We set aside around $1 million, and we created a democratic youth project that has 10 people board, 10 kids. I'll say kids in this in this context. They're young people is probably a more polite term, but there are 10 people between 14 and 19 years of age that make up our youth board. Now they meet once a week after school in our offices. They have 2 adult project coordinators, and they've spent 2.5 years creating a series of open calls, learning really how public management works. How do you make a decision with public money? How do you make it fair? How do you open it up to everyone to have their go at creating a project? So I think, I'm not sure of the numbers from the last round, but we've had 5 out of the 6 deadlines, and I think they've had something like 600 applications. With the board and a reference group of 40 kids from around the region, they have been able to identify 80 projects. And the main term is that the projects are by youth, with youth, and for youth. So next slide, you can see the board. Me on the left, our 2 coordinators in black on the right, and a youth board. I really am quite proud at what we've been able to do here. And of course, now the rest of this year is more about fun and production and concerts and all kinds of different cultural projects. But these guys have really made an effort to fulfill this, or to realize this idea of not just creating entertainment, but really learning how to manage and how to create projects. So next slide. Just one example of what they are creating. So you get an idea that it's not just large-scale pop concerts. This is from what they call the Children's International Day, where they invite international communities from our city to a full day of international productions in the library. So this is the second floor of the library. Next slide. And this is the final little stretch before we open up for questions. Just a little something about our program. You can go to the next slide right away. So here it all sort of comes back to the beginning, I hope. So you can see at the very top here, you can see how the sun moves through a year in Bodø and Nordland. In the beginning of the year, the part we've just been through, January and February, the sun is actually almost gone behind the mountains. It's not really what they call, what's it called, polar night. It's not really a polar night. It's just that we have the mountains in the way in the east. So the first part of the year, it's really about the sun returning. Now we're moving towards spring. We have the spring equinox. This should be about more sort of optimistic perspectives. It's about togetherness. It's about the first big youth projects. Moving into summer, of course, we have the 6 weeks of Midnight Sun. We have to do something special about that. So that's more our festival season. And then in the end of the summer, when the sun sets again, you get the first autumn storms. This is a time to have conferences, debates, more friction and drama. We're doing projects about freedom of expression and yeah, trying to sort of touch on some of the more difficult questions. And then in the end, when people talk about the dark time of the year, we want to talk about the Arctic light. So that the end of the year, we say it's not really about darkness. It's more about the feeling when you go to a movie theater, to a cinema and or a theater, when the light dims, you know, it's about to begin. So hopefully the end of this year will be like the lights are dimming and the future of Bodø is beginning. That's the general idea, a year of light and sun. And I'll show you some of the light if you move to the next slide. This is my final couple of slides here. So this was the city center of Bodø on February 3rd, 2023. So 1 year before our big opening, this was how it looked. And I can tell you, at this point, we had already for years had discussions going about when do you do the opening in Arctic Norway, outdoors? When do you risk to do an outdoor opening? So a year ago, or a little more than a year ago now, we kind of got the best proof we could when we had this kind of night on the 1 year to go. We had a full night of Northern Lights, completely still water and -3 degrees, and just, you cannot see it here, but just a fresh drizzle of white snow around the city. So we said, of course, this is going to work just fine, no problem. And then if you move to the next slide, I'll show you the day before our opening this year. So you can say the risk is real working in Northern Norway. We had, let's see now, 2 weeks of rigging and preparing for the opening night. 3 times in the last week before our opening, we had to work backwards in a way to lower all the technical equipment, to strap everything onto the waterfront, to the streets, and then rebuild the day after the storm. Just to give you a feeling of what a storm in Bodø is like, I can tell you that the Monday before our opening, a bike came past my office up the street with no rider on it. It just on its side, just slowly moving up the street. So that sort of gives you an idea of what we were working with. But I'll finish the presentation before we take the questions, and I hope you get some sound now. So we finish with just a short view, a video clip of how our opening day was like. A little over 60 events in the city center of Little Bodø in the north of Norway, and then we do questions after that. Next slide, and we'll see what happens.
It's not a last like a chimney hundreds making hundreds homeless. It's not a hurricane against which we are render hopeless. It's not a war to win the right and you said the right things. No, you're just so lonely. So relax, 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 relax. away from you.
Fuck. And we can stop sharing.
Okay. We try that.
Well, first of all, this is Gunnar again. Thank you so much, Henrik, for this. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
And I know that you have been working so hard on this, and I have seen a little part of the opening show, as much as NRK allows me to see here in my part of the world. But I also seen some of the comments, because I know that you focused a lot on Sami culture. Not everybody were so happy with that. Can you say a little about that?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, we had, I think we had probably the longest running cultural debate in, at least in Bodø's history. The days, it was a full 2 weeks going back and forth. And one of the main topics was, as Gunnar mentions here, the Sami dimension of the program. So there are two main debates when it comes to Sami culture in Northern Norway. One is the Sami versus Norwegian question. I'll call it a question here. It's the main debate is really, should we represent Sami culture in a project like this, and how much? That's basically a way to sum it up, because the sort of, let's say, the opposition, the people arguing against us, say that, well, this is just a small percentage of people. They don't mention the fact that we've been through 100 years of sort of Norwegianization politics. Is that how it's said in English? I'm not quite sure. I guess you understand what I mean. It's been a full century of sort of prohibiting language, practice of culture, Norwegianization of last names. You had to change your last name to register a farm. So all of these perspectives, that's probably the main debate. And then there's a sub debate where the question is really, how do you represent an indigenous culture, which is to us a lot more interesting and equally more challenging. So it's a question of who makes decisions on behalf of indigenous people. What language do you use? Do you use the language, the indigenous language that the most people understand, or the local representation? Yeah, no, that's without me sort of being personal in this. I think that's an answer to Gunnar's question. It's a question of how much indigenous culture is enough or too much, and how do you represent indigenous culture? So yeah, that's the short answer to that.
We're going around for questions for you.
Yeah, thanks. I spent a little time, but I'm happy to stay a little longer if you have the time, so we can have a few questions.
I'd just like to make a comment. Norway continues to inspire me greatly. The Nobel Peace Prize, for example. This program really inspires me, especially with youth by, with, and for cultural. I wish you'd bring it to America and do it here. We need this expression that you have made. It's really inspiring, not just for Europe, but for all of us. This world needs to be more what you just presented. So thank you.
Thanks.
Very much. Really inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you. If I,
The question is actually, help us to make Minneapolis the cultural capital of Europe, please.
No, but if I can make one short comment, I think what we have realized doing this, especially the youth project, what we call it Young 2024, because then it works like most of you probably know the word young in Norwegian. It's just the last three letters, ung, UNG. So we call it Young 2024 in English or Ung 2024 in Norwegian. I think what we have realized is that that project is probably the project in our program that most clearly sort of showcases what we can do in Norway, because we have the most valuable currency available, which is trust. We have a lot of trust that we can spend, like, for example, in our youth project. And we have this tendency of taking this for granted, but in the youth project, it really comes across what does it mean to give a youth project $1 million. It's never, I mean, we have no projects in Norway that have ever been close to this. And we have had questions, especially early on, we had questions, what if they come up with crazy ideas? And we tried to answer them, well, what if the mayor comes up with a crazy idea? He's powerful. The youth, they will refer to the reference group and to their adult coordinators and everything. But thanks again. Thanks for the comment.
I'd like to say that it's bringing the light that we need in the darkness for the world.
Yeah, thanks. Come see it.
Someone else? Thank you so much, Henry. That was fascinating. I loved how you did the maps to give us perspective on the distances. That was really, really interesting, as was the rest of your presentation. I just wanted to comment that circa 1900, we had an immigrant from Boda come here who was a sculptor. His name is John Carl Daniels. And his sculptures are all over the state of Minnesota, including two of Leif Erikson, one which resides in the state capitol grounds of St. Paul. And he's also done in North Dakota some sculptures. He's very prominent, and he lived to be 103 years old. So if I can come to Bodo and live to be 103, let me know. Then the more recent Boda culture, they had an exhibit at the Minneapolis Institute of Art within the last year of a textile artist. And I'm horrible at pronunciation here, but it's Kyo Baumfeng, who is a Sami artist. So we have experienced some of your culture here in the Twin Cities for a long time, since, like I said, about 1900.
Yeah, thanks.
Walking.
I'm wondering why Boda was a target and bombed during World War II.
Yeah, the short answer to that question is really a strategic position. They had so to give it a little context, it's a nice free harbor in an area that is right where the Gulf Stream hits Norway, so inside of the Lofoten Islands that sort of catch the Gulf Stream and make this what we call the Green Arctic. So the strategic positions of Bodø and also Narvik, that probably some of you have heard of, the next city north of us, that is sort of two important strategic positions, because you have one at the inlet of the West Fjord, and you have the sort of the bottom of the West Fjord where you get the railway connection to Sweden and the iron production. And that's probably the main idea, trying to sort of destroy and take command over cities and villages in strategic positions with ice-free harbors.
I thought it was interesting that Boda area is not losing people.
Yeah,
In
you're right.
Minnesota, the small towns are getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, the next level of that story is really that we part of the argument, if we do sort of the full argument about the Capital Culture Project, is that the smaller villages around Nordland, they have that tendency of losing people. So it's not a fortunate position for a regional capital to sort of empty the region of young resources. So that's also part of the idea of sort of opening up to an international project and saying we have to be part of a larger community than this. It's not like we can build a city on youth from the neighboring villages. But Bodø is just growing.
So it looks like you put in a lot of work organizing all of these fun activities. Wonderful slideshow.
Thanks.
Yeah, good place to visit. Anybody else?
There's one over there.
Hang on. One more.
Hi, thank you very much, and obviously you have a lot of good programs and a lot of good objectives. But we've also found that there's a lot of people all around the world that want to go to better themselves, but it also attracts the negative elements, and we have people that come to cross and just take advantage of what's being given away in sanctuary cities, and we could get thousands of unaccompanied minors and bigger burdens on the school systems and drug cartels and a lot of these things. Do you have some sort of protection or forethought to make sure that they don't, the Norwegian system is so trusting and good, but as a percent of world population, very small, and with tens of thousands of people looking, can you accomplish the good without getting, keeping away the bad?
Yeah, this is difficult to answer without being a little political, but I guess I'll just be honest and say what I think, and you take it for what it is. I think the best story of what you are describing is from when Norway found oil with the help of the American companies. So through the late 60s and early 70s, when they started establishing the whole oil age of Norway, we have this legendary state proposal of how to regulate oil extraction in Norway. And they did that with 78% tax from day one. So from the first dollar made, from the first day of oil industry, they had 78% tax. Now, to be able to do anything with 78% tax shows, I think, there's no better way to describe how much trust Norway had to spend in the 60s and 70s. I don't think we'll ever be able, or at least not now, you won't be able to sort of do the same thing. So to try to answer your question with a little bit of a politics involved, we do not have the same system now for fish farming, for example. It's much more difficult to add tax. They did, the current government did a couple of years ago add a tax system or added, it's not like they don't pay tax, but they added a tax to the fish farming companies, which created a lot of debate, negative reactions, and also some people moving out of Norway and moving the ownership away. So we are kind of in the middle of this debate that you're commenting on. How do we protect our systems and still stay international in a way? We have historic examples that it's possible. For example, within oil, it really is. And And I guess this is the next big test for Norway. How do we handle the green shift? How do we handle protein production, fish farming, all of these industries that are really presented as part of the solution, but they don't have this ability to sort of from the very first start add this quite extreme tax level. So I don't have an answer to how it's going to be done, but maybe one way is to just look back into history and say we did it once, maybe we can do it again. But you're touching on some of the main discussions in Norway at the moment.
Thank you so much for your time and telling us your story.
Thank you, guys. I hope to come back there